My digital photography has been supported by Olympus since 1998, and my first digital camera was the Camellia C1400. For more than 27 years, I have been privileged to try many of the latest Olympus cameras. Particularly memorable was the launch of the first 4/3 model, the E1, and I have one here. Launched in 2003, it was designed from a blank sheet of paper, and although it's only got 5 million pixels, it was good enough, the quality was good enough for magazine front covers. And incidentally, I still keep the old brochures as a sort of keepsake. Then that was followed very quickly by the E500, the E400. Then there was the pen. Do you remember that? Yes, I've got one here. This must be quite an early model because we had to have these things which you slipped into the shoe of the camera so that you could use it as a viewfinder, which was applicable only to early models. Then there was the OMD, and certainly the pen and the OMD cameras heralded the launch of Micro Four Thirds. These were cameras that heralded the introduction of that standard, which Olympus have followed, now OM System of course, have followed for many years. They are marketed by OM Digital Solutions. I'm currently, incidentally, using the OM5, which is recording this program. Although retired from running holidays and lecturing, I still dabble in achieving publication in books, magazines and calendars. And I've got a couple here, one of Hertfordshire, and this I recognise as Hereford, the cathedral there, and the River Wye. And this, of course, is in addition to my YouTube channel, which I find very creative in my advanced years. Now, these programs go beyond photo gear, describing also my photo shoots and how I tackle them with Olympus and OM System cameras. My forte is UK landscapes and architecture, and whilst this survey of Olympus and OM System cameras feature a selection of sunrise and sunset images, I would point out that much of my commercial work require images taken throughout the day and not just at the two ends as featured here. I first go back to the E20 in 2002, not my first digital camera, but a model that preceded the 4/3 standard launched in 2003 with, of course, the E1, which I showed you a moment ago. So let's get on with the pictures. The E20 was, if memory serves me correctly, before RAW. Therefore, as the camera saved direct to JPEG or TIFF, you had to check that the camera controls were set correctly, as in 2002, software was not as sophisticated as it is today. Then you couldn't correct errors, the classic being white balance accidentally set on tungsten. Yes, I have done it, but no problem now when saving to RAW and possibly JPEGs too with the latest version of Adobe Lightroom. I haven't been able to correct the burnt out cloud above that mountain, but that wouldn't be a problem today with my OM5. I have always been a control freak when it comes to exposure. I am not doubting the excellence of multi-pattern metering, but when errors occur, highlights are more difficult to correct than shadows. That was not without its initial problem, when noise could easily creep into the image. Not so today. Today I spot meter practically everything for which an electronic finder is essential, as it provides real-time information. The E400 had live view, but the finder was optical. Center weighted gave some control, as spot was unforgiving when I got it wrong. 4/3 and later micro 4/3 have sensors that are smaller than other formats. This means that the laws governing depth of field, controlled by aperture choice and lens focal length, changed dramatically. Broadly speaking, 4/3 gives more depth of field at most settings, which led to a common misunderstanding that you couldn't throw the background out of focus. If you understand traditional photography, it was easy, and not just landscapes, but close-ups too. The pen was a high-quality camera that could be slipped into the pocket, and I used it discreetly when leading a photo holiday, as here. I switched exposure mode to shutter priority to freeze the waves. The 12-50 lens, much underrated but no longer in production, was the kit lens for the first EM5. I'm using it on a later version of the camera. Sun was quite strong even at dawn, but I have got away with f/16. The shot was taken on private ground at Derwent Bank, belonging to HF Holidays, where I used to run photo holidays. My bedroom is just behind me, and what you cannot see is my morning cuppa. A severe test for keeping everything sharp. Even with micro 4/3, I didn't make things easy by leaving the camera on program mode, as Aldborough Village looks a little soft. A smaller aperture would have increased depth of field, helped of course by the excellence of the EM1's image stabilizer, as the shutter speed would be longer, risking camera shake when hand holding. Technology is not always at the service of the photographer. Focus stacking was developed for macro photography, where depth of field is extremely limited. Not landscapes, as some people think, where a knowledge of depth of field provides the conventional answer. Purists will shrink in horror at the metadata. f/22 risking diffraction. The risk of a wider aperture would increase flare, which I consider worse than diffraction. The answer would have been a prime lens, but I didn't have one. I am now spot metering and saving to RAW. That allows me to make changes at home before converting to a JPEG, deciding then how much detail I show in Denison Down, for example, and provided I keep the RAW file, I can change my mind later. I do not like adding accessories to a camera or committing myself to certain settings that lock me in. Art never stands still. Although in shot, stopping down to f/22 to avoid flare was unnecessary, as the sun is partially concealed by high cloud. A little earlier, flare would have been a greater problem, not only from the sun, but also the reflection in the water. The color cast is natural. A freak storm was spreading sand from the Sahara over the scene, a rare event of being in the right place at the right time, and it was forecast. 15th of October 2017 if you want to check. When planning a photo holiday, I never disclose my hand completely. The official shoot was Rydalwater and Grasmere, but I had pre-planned a visit to Scout Scar just outside Kendal on the way back to base as a bonus. The photo says it all, and it went down a treat. I couldn't drag my group away until the sun had set. Many Olympus photographers consider the 12-100 Pro as a flagship lens. It has an 8.5 times zoom ratio at f4 constant aperture. Nevertheless, I still required a small aperture to avoid flare, and there is a bit more difficult to control when the sun had cleared the cloud. It also burnt out its reflection in the sea to a pure white, difficult, if not impossible, to contain during photography and post-production without cloning. So this was the right moment. I borrowed the EM10 Mark II from Olympus. It is the entry-level camera into the OMD range, and I tested it on one of my holidays. Rainbows are at their most dramatic early or late in the day, when the sun is low in the sky, adding that pronounced arc. Rain also helps and suffering for your art, but protection in the shape of a private coach, well, that's just behind me. My most recent acquisition is the OM5, which I use with the 12-45 Pro lens, now preferred to the 12-100 as it is lighter and smaller for walking, in this case 12 miles. A test for any landscape photographer is a composition of high contrast, which the latest technology can resolve with high dynamic range exposure, where the camera takes several shots in register at different exposures, merging them in camera or computer. That is not the case here. It is a single shot, spot metering a highlight, saved to RAW with underexposed shadows corrected in Lightroom before converting to JPEG, as presented here. I have mentioned several techniques without explanation as to how they are done. I started my channel in 2013, and whilst I am an OM System ambassador, many techniques are covered in my channel irrespective of camera make. So, if you're not sure, take a look there.